Last chapter, we discussed Excel setup, model formatting, and rules of thumb. In this chapter, we'll take a look at the basic layout of a real estate model and the three fundamental types of real estate models. Let's get started by talking about the main sheets or tabs we'll be working with in a real estate financial model. Real estate models can come in many different flavors. I've seen models that have been built entirely on one Excel sheet, and I've seen models that have had 10 or more sheets. But I think that the most effective way to set up a real estate model is with three tabs. The first is the Inputs and Drivers tab, the second, the Model tab, and third, the Transaction Summary tab. As we'll get into later, these three tabs are really just the foundation, and depending on what type of model we're building, we'll also add a couple of supporting schedules on top. First is the Inputs and Drivers sheet. The sheet is really exactly what it sounds like. It's where we'll group important information about the property and transaction, and is where the input of the majority of our assumptions and drivers. So let's look at an example model here. I'm going to stay pretty zoomed out on this. I really don't want you guys to pay any attention to the detail. I just want you to get a sense of the geography of the model. And so you'll see this is the entire tab. But let's go through this section by section. Here in the top left, you'll see we've got our property overview. This is where we're going to put some of the basic summary items about the investment. What's the name of the deal? What type of property is it? Where is it located? How big is it? How old is it? Those sorts of things. Then below that, you'll see there's a section on acquisition assumptions. This is going to be some of the basic inputs that are going to drive the model. So when are we going to buy the deal? How long do we plan on owning the property? What's the purchase price? And then over to the right in this highlighted section, we'll see we've got a section called joint venture assumption. And so if we have a partner in the deal, this is where we'd input those details. Below that, you'll see similar to acquisition assumptions, we have exit assumptions. And this is really, where we're going to put, some of the summary items for exiting the deal. What do we think we're going to be able to sell this property for and at what date? Below that, we've got our financing assumptions. And so, as we're all familiar, real estate is a highly levered asset class, and this is just where we'll summarize the debt. So if we look below that, you'll see we've got our drivers section. And in our drivers section, this is really where we're going to put most of the assumptions for thinking about what happens throughout the life of the deal. Depending on what the asset type is, this section will be formatted a little bit differently. You'll see here, this is just an example of a multifamily model, and so we're pulling in some of the historical financial information. And below that, we've got revenues and expense assumptions. We've got our growth rates, occupancy assumptions. And then below that, again, it's just some more summary information over here to the right, the number of units. And then the capital expenditures section, this really pairs with what we have up here, our renovation budget. Again, depending on the type of property, this section may be formatted a little bit differently. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff off to the right here that we're not going to get into at this point. So after the Inputs and Drivers tab, we have the Model tab, which is where we're going to build our pro forma and spend the majority of our time building out formulas and functionality. And here, you'll see a list of the core, what I'll call sections of the Model tab. I've listed them here in order from top line, where we're going to keep track of things like occupancy and then create our revenue projections, all the way down to our waterfall, and where we'll divvy up returns to all investors. So again, let's jump into the example model. So again, I'm going to zoom out. Don't worry about the details. We'll be coming back to this. And so let's just start at the top and work our way to the bottom. I'm going to just point out some of the key sections that I've referenced on the PowerPoint slide. So you'll see up in the top left, we have a few of our key drivers of the transaction that are being pulled in for the Inputs and Drivers tab. Very basic information here, acquisition and exit date, as well as the size of our property. And you'll see off to the right here, at the very top of the model, we've got our timeline. Like we discussed in the Excel fundamentals video, this is where we're going to track all relevant time periods. I found that time frames we really want to track for a monthly real estate model are the actual dates, which we've got here. Of course, the months as well as the year. Some people put in quarters just to be thorough, but I haven't really seen the need to do it since real estate assets don't have strictly delineated quarterly reporting dates or anything like that that you track closely if you were modeling a company. So below there, you'll see we've got this top section after the timeline is usually reserved for things like occupancy and rent growth. And you'll see we're kind of tracking them in a couple of places here as well, because we've got similar items down here. So next, after those key drivers, we've got our income section. We've got our income section here. And this can really be broken up a few different ways depending on where you work, your personal style and preferences, or the property type. Below income, we've got operating expenses. This is one you don't typically see broken up in any special way. It's really just whatever line items are relevant to your property type. And after your income and expenses, you're able to calculate your net operating income. So what we just went through there quickly is what is called the operating cash flows. These are called the operating cash flows because they're linked to the true operations of a property. And so after that, we've got the section that I like to call the non-operating cash flow. And as you've probably guessed, that's because these cash flows do not have to do with the specific property's operations, but more so with investment decisions made by the owner of the property. And so you'll see this first section in the non-operating cash flows is capital expenditures. We've only got a couple lines, but you could get much more detailed in the line items you spell out here. After the CapEx, we've got our acquisition and sale cash flows, which is just where we're paying for the property and receiving any proceeds from the sale later on. And then after our non-operating cash flows, we get to our unlevered cash flows. And so incorporating non-operating cash flows into our net operating income. So net operating income, non-operating cash flows, we get down to our unlevered cash flow. And you'll see this is the first time we're measuring any sort of returns on the investment here. After unlevered cash flow, we need to incorporate any debt on the property, which is in most cases there will be, as real estate is generally a highly levered asset class. And then after our unlevered cash flows, take into consideration our financing costs, and we'll get to our levered cash flows. At this point, we've really got everything we need to assess a property's return potential. Down below that, we have sources and uses over time. This source and uses section is really here to serve as a monthly summary of everything that's going on in the cells above. And then lastly, you'll see we've got the waterfall section of the model, which is quite detailed. And this is really a part of the model that gets built only once and then is really never touched again. But it's also the most infamous part of many modeling tests. After we've built our cash flow projections, thought through financing, the waterfall is how we'll divide up and determine what cash goes to who. And that really does it for the model tab. So lastly, we're going to talk about the transaction summary. Again, you'll see there's going to be a source and uses section. We're going to measure our returns, and we're going to do a summary of yields, our exit, debt, as well as the revenue expense assumptions. So let's click back over to our example model again, and we're going to go to our transaction summary. I'm going to zoom out here again. And so you could see this laid out in a number of ways. What I think we've got here is pretty intuitive. At the top, we've got sources and uses, which again is very similar to what we had at the bottom of the model tab, but we're only going to summarize our sources and uses at closing and throughout the life of the investment or the hold period. Below here, we'll see we've got a summary of our returns. It gets into a bit more detail, and it's also broken up based on, unlevered, levered, the different partners. Again, just rehashing our deal summary from the inputs tab. Similarly, rehashing our debt summary from the inputs tab, rehashing our joint venture assumptions. And then we've got an NOI summary here that really tracks our yield over time, which is very important for telling the story of an investment, but we'll talk more about that later. We're going to summarize our capital expenditures. We're going to summarize our exit. One of the key things here is understanding, of course, what are you selling the property for, and then taking a look at your investment. How is this broken up between terminal value, what you're getting, the profit you're getting on selling the building versus cash flow you get while owning the building. And then down here at the bottom, we really just have a very, very watered down revenue expense summary. And so this is just revenues, expenses, NOI, and we're measuring some key growth rates here. So again, as you can see, this transaction summary is being fed by things from both the inputs and the model tab.